Welcome, everybody. If you've got this far, if you've gone from 1 to 5, give yourself a clap. If you definitely got this far, no cheating, watching every single part of the review, put it in the comments, and I'll give you a shout out next time. Because fair play to you. Put a lot of work into this. Obviously, not everyone's going to watch every single minute, but as long as you get the gist, that's okay with me. Now, this is the one. I mean, I feel like I've just done this recently because obviously the races are only, a month, 2 months ago. And I did the full race reviews each time. So it's kind of like rehashing old ground. But I guess, this is the one. I mean, this was the one that, even looking back at the race names, it's just some of the stuff in Brazil, Jeddah, and obviously Abu Dhabi. It's crazy to think that, all the reviews, all the parts I've done so far, it's quite steady. France and Austria, and Max wins here, Max wins there, and Mercedes. And then the last 4 is just where it all goes. Apart from Qatar. Qatar was the only one that was like pretty straight. Even then there was some stuff happened there, but this was the one where it gets so intense. I think before I start, these little parts of these races here were a prime example of everyone was asking for the last however many years, at least since Rosberg retired, for a close racing. We want teams involved, we want a championship, we want a gripping title decider in the last race, the last lap. Now, the last 7 years, while Mercedes have been dominant, and even the 4 years before that when Red Bull were dominant, and even before that when Ferrari were dominant, it's all well and good wanting a close battle. But when you're used to one team dominating, your decision-making process is nice and easy. So the last 7 years, Hamilton's been winning every race almost. Mercedes has been dominating 1, 2, 40 seconds clear, blah, blah, blah. Not every race, but most. Now, the stewards, when something happens in the race, if something happens in the race, they've got all the time in the world to be like, right, okay, let's give this a 5-second penalty and everyone just forget about it the next race and just crack on. Nothing's going to affect the championship, apart from that Rosberg season, but, most of the stuff is just week in, week out. Stewards haven't got much to do, and nothing that they do is going to have any great consequence. So now when we get into a season like this, where everyone's been begging for close racing, a gripping championship with multiple different teams, be careful what you wish for, because now you end up with hyper pressure. Like there's never been, I say never, only because Ferrari messed up 2 years in a row in 17 and 18, and it was between Rosberg and Hamilton the other years. So it's never been since 2012, when there's like 4 or 5 different guys going for it. The last 9 seasons, there's not been any important high pressure decisions to be made. Now this season we're getting one after another. And the early part of the season they were kind of, FIA were kind of making it, they were doing all right, they were doing okay. And then it starts to get ramped up. And then once we get into Brazil, every decision they make now is under scrutiny, and they basically bottle most decisions, a lot of decisions from here on out, just because of the magnitude of what they're trying to deal with. Like they're trying to deal with a very, very popular, young, up and coming potential champion against the established 7-time greatest of all time. So now every decision you make is, are we going to swing it towards Max or Lewis? Not deliberately, because, and again, another thing going towards the end of what I'm going to say about Abu Dhabi, the majority of what the decisions that were made aren't corrupt. They weren't like, right, we need to do this a certain way. Some decisions were, I'll get to them, but more often than not, they just bottled decisions because they weren't used to this kind of pressure. That's the underlying tone. That's basically my position on a lot of what happened in these last 4 races. Is they kind of just were like, what do we do? Like, do we make it? Do we do it the way we've always done it, or do we have an eye on what the outcome's going to be? And I think they had an eye on what the outcome could be. They had an eye on what it looked like visually to new fans. They had obviously Netflix in the back of their mind, and they had the need. I think always the need for entertainment. That entertainment did come first for most of it, and I think now that we get into the later part of the season, it was definitely something. It was definitely seen more and more where they were making decisions that we just weren't seeing. I say we, fans of the sport have been watching it for 20 years, on off. A lot of people have been watching it for far longer. Martin Brundle's watched 500 races. people have seen a lot of different ways a Grand Prix weekend can play out. And the fact that we saw something in Brazil, in Jeddah, and in Saudi and Abu Dhabi that all of these people had never seen before tells you the only thing that's different is entertainment. Before, it was never really, it's always been entertainment, but now we've got Netflix, you've got new fans, you've got growing the sport, Liberty Media buying Formula One. Entertainment has taken a kind of a more forward step. And now, given that this is the first season really that Formula One's been super popular, it's time, use this as an example of how not to do it going forward. And then going forward, we've got some rules and okay, this is what happened in 2021. Let's make sure that doesn't happen again. And then the sport going forward is gonna grow exponentially, because clearly it's in a good place. But what happened in Abu Dhabi is going to send people the other way, fans and new fans, because there's just if people come in and they're looking, they're like, what on earth just happened there? Like, can they do that? Is that allowed? Oh yeah. Having to explain it is just crazy. So that's my more than 2 cents. That's my full dollar on just the general gist of what's happening. But listen, let's get straight into it. Straight into it. Brazil. Now, Brazil was just they're all fascinating. I'm not going to bore you with saying they're fascinating, but this is unbelievable. So we came into the race. Hamilton's 13 points behind, and Mercedes are a point in front. Red Bull have just won the last 2 races. Max absolutely flawless in Mexico, and he dominated. He held off Hamilton in America. So, and it felt like, given the celebrations after Mexico with Red Bull, it felt like that's kind of it now. Now, 13 points with 3 races to go is obviously not game, set, match, because typically, obviously, 7 points. You normally win 7 points for winning the race, and then the point for fastest lap either way. So 7 points per race, is like, okay, cool. If you beat Max 3 times in a row, you get 20 points. So it wasn't quite over, but this was the race where if this goes wrong, it is definitely over, because you can't have a deficit of that much going into the last 2 races. So Hamilton rocks up, and at the gate blasts everyone out of the way in qualifying. He at the time the qualifying finished on the Friday night, bearing in mind this is a sprint weekend, we had Hamilton P1, Verstappen, Bottas, Perez, Gasly. Right now, I think as the race finished, I think in the hours afterwards, I think things started to pop up on social media about Hamilton and Verstappen both being summoned to the stewards. So, and Hamilton for technical regulations, and Verstappen for sporting. So obviously technical being the actual car itself, and sporting being the general rules of the Formula One. So I'm thinking, again, because obviously normally we hear about stuff popping up. So the following day it comes up, Hamilton's been disqualified from qualifying, and Verstappen's been handed a €50,000 fine, or €50,000 fine. So Hamilton won first. His DRS wing failed the test. Now, again, so I'll break it down. His wing failed the test. So the gap is only allowed to open to a maximum of 85 millimeters. And they test it in the middle, which is fine. And on the edge, the thing they put through it actually goes through it, which means obviously the 85 millimeter block goes through the wing. That means it's bigger than 85 millimeters. So that failed the test, and his car was disqualified. Like, in terms of following procedure, that's fine. In terms of, if you said to me, right, this rear wing has failed, that's the rule, that's the punishment. Tick, 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 fine. Now, why they got to that decision is subject to conspiracy. Adrian Newey was in the steward's office that day, talking about the Mercedes rear wing. Obviously, this is, if you remember, this is when Karen Horner was really banging on about Mercedes' wing, and they're saying there's something really odd about it. Now, Verstappen got the fine for touching the rear wing. So after they got out in qualifying, Verstappen gets out the car, goes to Hamilton's rear wing, and we can't really see what happens, but he looks like he has a bit of fiddle with it to see if there's any give. Which is, I mean, again, if you follow the rules of the technical regulations, sporting regulations, touching another competitor's car while it's in parc ferme, which means you can't, even the own teams can't touch it, is a big no-no, because if you play it out to this end, what are they going to do? Verstappen's going to break something, like whoever it might be, whether Hamilton goes over and breaks a little piece of downforce off of Red Bull's car. Like, if you play it out to its end, you just can't touch other people's cars. So they were quite lenient with it, only because it was literally just a little, he barely touched it. So he got away with that one. But Hamilton started from the back in the sprint race. So he's been thrown out qualifying, so his qualifying time, even though he beat everyone by half a second, does not count. Now, sprint race comes along, and obviously Hamilton's at the back. He's thinking, well, where am I going to come? Where am I going to finish here? He's taken a new engine, so yeah, I probably forgot to mention that as well. In between, before qualifying started, it was announced that he was going to take a new internal combustion engine. So he's going to take 5-place grid drop. So they knew going into qualifying, you're going to take 5 places back in the actual race itself. So obviously you're able to qualify on pole, or get the fastest time in qualifying, and then still start the sprint from the front, but the race you're going to start 5 places back. So if you follow the narrative there. So that was kind of, that was a deficit they were looking to go back on, but obviously the new engine was looking like it was going to be good. Now, we didn't know how good that engine was going to be, and no one had ever mentioned how good the engine is when it's brand new and fresh. Now, there's 2 parts to this. So obviously, to start off with the sprint itself. The sprint goes off, Bottas goes on soft tyres again. So if you remember again, the first sprint race in Britain, Bottas was on soft tyres. So Mercedes do like to split their strategies in sprints, which is interesting. So Bottas gets Max off the line. Remember, Max was P1. Bottas gets Max off the line. Sainz actually gets past Perez. And you have Hamilton from P20 flying through the field. He ends up, I think he ends up in like the top half of the top 10 after like 2 laps. He ends up coming P5. He was only a second off Perez. So you had Bottas, Verstappen, Sainz, Perez, and then Hamilton was only a second back. I mean, if he had 2 more laps, Hamilton might have even come third. So that was the order going out of the sprint race. And obviously the race order starts as it was, obviously, but with Hamilton down in P11. So race starts now. Verstappen obviously he jumps Bottas at the start. Bottas gets a terrible start. Perez goes past him as well. Some safety cars happen. Long story short, Hamilton's gone from P11 right up to the back of Verstappen. And then you had the incident at turn 4 where Hamilton's in front, long way in front. And Verstappen being Verstappen, he's going to send it into the corner. But he sent it into the corner so deep, he's not going to make the corner. So he runs wide. Hamilton avoids the collision. Hamilton goes off the track. Verstappen goes way off the track, leaves Hamilton out there, and off they go. The stewards note it, but they don't investigate it. Now, they don't investigate it because we now know later on, because they didn't have Max's on board. If they had it at the time, they'd have at least investigated it, and then if they'd given a penalty or not, it's kind of neither here nor there. But let's be clear, the reason why they didn't investigate it is because they didn't have the onboard, which only came out 2 days later. So at the time, they looked at it, they looked at the off-boards, or they looked at Hamilton's, they looked at the actual TV footage, and thought, for whatever reason, they thought, that's fine. Like, even if you go back and look at Austria, like I mentioned before, about everyone getting penalties for going off track, that was a head-scratcher, and that was one of those, I think they mentioned the let it race thing, and obviously you had Red Bull on the phone to Michael Massey saying, that's definitely let it race, you should let them race, blah, blah, blah. That's to me, that's just slam dunk 5-second penalty. That's just it doesn't even need to be discussed at length. It's like, hey, what's that? Yeah, that's a penalty, obviously, because Verstappen's just run Hamilton off the track, obviously, hasn't he? Now, in hindsight, because Hamilton went on to win the race, he ended up overtaking him later on. It didn't matter. So Mercedes pushing for the review of the decision it's kind of seen mixed reviews because obviously you try and change the result afterwards, and Hamilton's already won the race anyway. But I think the point does stand that if, and obviously Verstappen didn't come that far in front of Bottas. So if Bottas knew he had a penalty coming, he might have even sped up. So the issue was that they didn't investigate it and they just let it crack on. Now that set a bad precedent for what's going to happen later on in the rest of the season, all the way to the end of the season, because you've basically made it very, very confusing to all the drivers, and they all said it. Russell, Norris, all the guys, they were like, and Leclerc was quite outspoken about it. He's like, we don't know what the rules of engagement are now. Are we allowed to go off track? Because in Austria, you're giving everyone penalties, and now because it's Max and Lewis, you think, oh no, let them race. Which no one's ever run someone off track and just gone, yeah, let them race, it's fine. So that was this is where things are unraveling a little bit for the FIA in terms of their officiating of things. But nonetheless, they left there with a 14-point lead in the drivers because Max got the 2 points for the sprint race. and then Hamilton obviously beat him in the race itself. So Mercedes were looking like, the constructors were looking a bit better. Red Bull were 14 points clear with 3 races to go. So you're still, in terms of, catch up for Hamilton, as far as he's concerned, the chase was still on. Now, going into, given that he was thrown out of qualifying for the gap being, it was actually 0.02 of a millimetre too big, and that was because of damage. All of those factors combined, throwing him out the qualifying completely was obviously a very strong penalty, but you can't really, if the gap is faulty, it's faulty. But you probably would have thought, no matter who it is, if they'd looked at it and thought, all right, it's obviously damaged. But I think generally speaking, it was a fair penalty. But it was one of those where it's like, wow, you can throw him out of qualifying, and then he still ends up he gets P5 in the sprint, and then he wins the race from P11 with this new engine. Now the new engine, not only is it a new engine, but it's been turned up, and now we've obviously seen the videos and done a lot of research since. It's the same engine specification as the other one. So when they put a new engine, it's just a little bit better, it's fine. But they have to run it for 6 weeks, 6 races. So they have to run it at a conservative level and try and make it last as long as possible. But with 4 races to go, knowing you only need to run it for 3 races properly, because you don't need it in Qatar, you think, okay, you can turn it up. Essentially, if you think about it like this, if they had it at 4 to try and get through 6 races, that'll make it through the 6 races. But if you only got half of that, you can put it up double that. That's obviously not literally quantifiable, but it literally can be. You can throw it up way higher, throw the engine up as high as you want, and run it at a much higher mode for half the time. That's why it's so fast. So that's the mystery, if you don't know already, about the spicy engine, as they call it. So that was that. Qatar was next. So Qatar came next, and this was one where I know when we looked at it before, it looked like a tight, twisty circuit, and it looked like it would be one that Red Bull would be dominant on, and especially after, the engine issue the engine controversy and the wing controversy with Mercedes pretty much reached fever pitch at this race. Horner was saying, if we see those kind of speeds here, we're going to protest the car, which would have been, and then they soon backed out of it. Which is strange. I don't know why they backed out of it, because they should have known that Mercedes weren't going to run that same engine again, or maybe Mercedes played a masterstroke and they put the older engine in. So they took Hamilton's spicy engine out, saved it, which you're allowed to do, and they took the other engine out, which they had in Mexico, and put it in the car. And they were still 0.8 of a second faster than P2. It wasn't Verstappen, but they were still miles clear. So that was a strange one. Qualified. The only real bit of drama in the Qatar race, or the Qatar weekend, was in qualifying where Gasly had a puncture. Now he missed the pit entry, so he ends up stopping on the actual pit straight. Verstappen and Bottas did fast laps behind them. Now they were both still well slower than Hamilton, but Verstappen got a 5-place penalty for that, and Bottas got a 3. So that mixed the grid up nicely. So you had Hamilton, and you had Gasly and Alonso behind Hamilton on soft tyres. Then you had Norris, Sainz, Bottas, Verstappen, Tsunoda, Ocon, Vettel. Now, looking at this, this was huge for the championship. Now, it's a very casual 5-second penalty to get for not slowing down for yellow flags, which it's just standard. If you don't slow down for yellow flags, it's a strange one. But obviously, the way the marshals put the yellow flags up and race control, it was a mess. So I do have sympathy for Verstappen there, getting a 5-second penalty in such circumstances, but as with the rear wing the week before, it's like, what do you want me to do? Like, if yellow flags are right, you have to slow down. It's just fact. And it's a safety thing. You can't really overrule that. Now, that's kind of where the drama ended, really. Obviously, there was that kind of hope, expectation that Gasly or Alonso on soft tyres by Hamilton would actually send it. Alonso said he was going to send it. He didn't end up quite getting there. But he was running in P2 for a bit until Verstappen just came. Verstappen beat Bottas and Sainz off the line and was up right behind Alonso, and he took him, and he took Gasly. And then from there, it was just a very, comfortable was not really the word, but it was the only race I can think of for a long, long, long time since Austria, to be honest, that was just a kind of bit of a cruise. Now, the only bit that added a bit of jeopardy was the fact that we had 4, Bottas, Russell, Norris, and Latifi, all getting punctures. Now, Hamilton was about 10, 15 seconds out in front for most of the race, and Verstappen threw new tyres on to try and get an advantage. But you know, this race was kind of like there's nothing really to review. It's just, you know, Hamilton won the race. Alonso got P3, which is kind of cool. It's not kind of nice to see Alonso back on the podium that time anyway. I mean, we'll see what happens next year because Alonso is one of those guys. He's of the Verstappen mold. So if he gets on top, he's not like Mr. Nice Guy. He's not Lando Norris or Lewis Hamilton. He's not a bit soft when it comes to racing. He's as hard as it gets, and he's obviously a double world champion. So that was cool to see him back on the podium. He just about held off Perez just because there was a virtual safety car at the end. Bottas had a shocker of a whole weekend. Obviously, he had his 3-place grid penalty. He got jumped by Verstappen and was running in like P8, P11 for most of the race. Then he pitted for new tyres to try and go for the fastest lap, gets a puncture, and the car gets ruined, and he has to retire from the race. So he couldn't even take that point off Verstappen to help Hamilton. So this was kind of like not a nothing race, but it was a race where not a whole lot happened. Not a whole lot was kind of in terms of championship. It was one of those where it's like, okay, Hamilton's got a faster car now, and he takes, you know, another little chunk out of Max's lead, and the lead is 8 points now. Crucially, because Max got that fastest lap point that Hamilton couldn't pit for because he was out in front, and Bottas got a puncture and he got damaged. 8 points is obviously an important gap, because if Hamilton can't, unless Max comes P3 or lower, Hamilton winning the race with the fastest lap in Saudi Arabia would only make the championship tied. Now, given Max had more wins, that basically almost guaranteed a final race showdown in Abu Dhabi. Like this result. So these last two races, Brazil going how it went, and Bottas getting a puncture, set the finale up as it did. So that's kind of like, it's funny when you pick different bits, you realise, okay, that's exactly how they're the kind of crucial little details you kind of miss. You know, you think, Hamilton got disqualified and thingy, but he still won the race anyway. Yeah, but he missed out 3 points in the sprint race, and obviously Max would have lost the points. That's a 4-point swing. And then Max getting a fastest lap when Bottas could have taken it is another point. So these tiny little nuances are fascinating when you think about them. But that was the least interesting of the races that I'm reviewing in this particular segment, because we have the number one and number two, really. I mean, of two of the most dramatic races I've ever seen, for context and for actual drama on track. Jeddah in Saudi Arabia was next. Like this was definitely the one. I mean, take Abu Dhabi out of it. This had so much going on, and it was a brand new track. And another thing, just a quick segue. Jeddah's the second race on the calendar, 2022. So we're going back there very, very soon. So I hope whatever lessons they've learned from this race only like 6-7 weeks ago, they're going to put into practice, because we're going back there very, very soon in race 2 or 3 of the championship. So this is a bit of a concern. They're going back there so soon. They haven't had enough time to fix all the issues they had. This was dramatic from get-go. Obviously, the track was brand new. No one had ever been out on it, and Max went straight in at the top of timesheets in practice. Hamilton. One thing about practice, Hamilton got very lucky with another reprimand for blocking Mazepin. It was a bad block, to be fair. He blocked Mazepin, blocked Gasly, and he also ignored. Well, there's a threat of yellow flags, but he didn't ignore those. So he got a second reprimand. If he gets 3, he's a 10-place grid drop for the next race. So, given what happens in Abu Dhabi, that could easily have gone very south. Now, speaking of south, Verstappen was on track for lap of the year, one of the lap of his career, one of the best laps of all time in Formula One. He was up 3 or 4 attempts up going into that last corner. Now I've seen it so many times, he makes a mistake, and then all he has to do is just turn, like, come off the gas a bit, turn and make the corner. But he hits the gas, hits the wall, ruins his lap. He starts P3 behind Hamilton and Bottas again. Now, what people forget about this race is the first off the line, the first getaway was clean. Like, they all got off the line. Hamilton got off the line, Bottas, and everyone got round one lap, or half a lap at least, without any issues. And it was just off we go. Like, everyone just cracked on. I think it was like lap 7 or 8. It was down the line anyway. The people were off the line and off they went in the race. Hamilton, Bottas and Verstappen were cruising. Now, safety car comes out. So the two Mercedes pit. As you know, Red Bull stayed out. Then Michael Massey decided to put a red flag out to fix the barriers. And it didn't look like, again, hit me up if you saw anything different. I've looked at lots of angles, lots of things on Twitter. It didn't look like they were actually fixing anything. And I looked at the barriers when they threw the red flag. There's the Tech Pro one, so they've got the stuff in between. Didn't look like they were fixing anything, but they threw a red flag anyway. Red Bull got a free pit stop, which was, it was just sus at the time. It was one of those like, really? Red Bull stayed out? It should have been, why did Red Bull stay out on old tyres and then they threw a red flag? That was one of those, that was a strange one. Safety car restart now, obviously a standing restart from the grid. Verstappen runs Hamilton off the track on turn 1 and Ocon sneaks through. And then behind them, there's also all kinds of madness with, I think that was when Perez and Leclerc smashed together and Russell, Mazepin smashed together. Another long red flag session. This was when we had the deal or no deal with Michael Massey. So Michael Massey's on the radio to Red Bull and he mistakenly said, we're going to offer you P2. They forgot that Ocon was in front of Verstappen as well. They offered Red Bull P2 on the grid. He meant the P3, but he offered them a place on the grid rather than taking a penalty, which everyone found weird. I mean, I didn't find that too much of an issue, but I think it's because they broadcast it. And he was kind of like, oh, we're going to offer you P3. It's like, what do you mean? It's a penalty, isn't it? But that I didn't have too much of a problem with. Then they took it. Now you had Ocon P1, Hamilton P2, Verstappen P3 for the third restart, the third overall restart. The original one, then you had the red flag one, and then the second red flag one. Now, this was a rare moment in terms of this weekend. Max's brilliance. I mean, he's, again, like Mexico, he went down the inside and it was just a send from nowhere. He was lucky that Hamilton was paying attention to Ocon on the outside. But Verstappen sends it down the inside, off he goes. Now, that's kind of how it kind of continued on for a while until Hamilton chased him down again. Verstappen pushes him off again. He gets told to give the place back strategically. He tries to do that. Hamilton's wary of it. Verstappen brake tests him. He did brake test him. He brake tests him. Hamilton smashes his wing. I don't know how he didn't break his wing. So he smashes his wing off. Or it smashes his wing. He bends it. Verstappen is told to obviously, he cheats off. Off he goes. Hamilton catches him up again. He's told to overtake. Verstappen lets him by, but then dives down the inside again and overtakes him. That's always going to be a penalty. So Verstappen so the first penalty wasn't given because they offered to arrange the grid in a certain way. So that was infringement 1. Infringement 2 was that particular one when he was told to give the place back. He didn't. Well, he brake tested him first, and then the second attempt, he dove down the inside, and so he didn't let the Hamilton get an advantage. Gets a 5-second penalty for that, which is important. Then he lets him by later, and I don't think he needed to let him by. So he got the penalty, and I don't think Verstappen was... Nobody's mentioned this either, even after the race. I don't think Verstappen was told, you have to let Hamilton by again. So after he brake tested him, then he got the 5-second penalty for diving down the inside again. I don't think, even though he's in the lead, I don't think he needed to give the place back. So I don't know if he could have he could have gone out and built a gap, but I don't think he could have because Hamilton had a faster car, even with half a wing. So, race finished. The race finished as that happened. Bottas got Ocon on the line, like literally by a tenth. He was chasing him down. So that was huge for the constructors. Then you had obviously Hamilton, Verstappen, Bottas, Ocon. Right? They're the ones that matter. Now, if you look at the gaps between everybody, Verstappen already had Verstappen retrospectively after the race got a 10-second penalty for the brake test, and then the steward basically said, Verstappen brake tested him, here's 10-second penalty. And then there's another decision where it's like, when someone brake tests someone, that's about as bad as it gets, in terms of real incidents, apart from actually smashing into someone. Brake testing someone is just, you're not allowed to do. 10-second was quite lenient. Now, given that 10-second penalty, you see the gaps. He was 6 seconds ahead of Bottas, or 5.7. Now, Ocon is right behind Bottas, and obviously you see Ricciardo and Gasly there. Now, if Verstappen gets, let's say in brackets, a proper penalty, a 30-second penalty, a time penalty, a 20-second time penalty, that makes things, that changes the championship order. Now, bearing in mind they gave him quite a lenient penalty. They gave him the penalty, you can't really complain that it wasn't hard enough, because again, like with Silverstone and with Monza, it's sort of, they as long as they judge it a mistake and they assess a penalty, as long as they don't literally screw it completely up, like they do in Abu Dhabi, I'm kind of happy with it. So wanting more of a penalty, the 20-second penalty here would have been, I don't know, not really a fan of that. But a 10-second for a brake test is, even Lando Norris came out and said afterwards, he's like, how's that 10-second for a brake test? That's quite lenient. You might as well just brake test everyone then, get 10-second penalty for it. So if he got a proper penalty, like I said, it could have either been in P5 or P7, depending on if it was a 20-second or a 30-second penalty, which changes the championship order just dramatically. Like it's a whole different thing. Going into the last race, there's no, is Max going to take Lewis out? So coming out of this, obviously, as we all well know, it was tied on points. Mercedes looked like they had the constructors on lock because Perez didn't finish and Mercedes got a 1-3. So the constructors was kind of a done deal at this point, which everyone kind of like forgot about even after the race, that Mercedes won 8 in a row. But as most people wanted, the neutrals and FIA, it was dead even between Hamilton and Verstappen. Verstappen was in front on countback because he won more races, which is kind of interesting because they gave him Belgium, which wasn't a race. So that was another one. So all these little things, there's too many to pick out. You can start from the beginning and go, right, that was important, that was important, that was important. But it's essentially the last decisions that obviously make most of the difference. But this was a great. I've watched this race I think 4 times. It's just a fun race to watch because there's so much going on. But as you know, saving the best for last, and Abu Dhabi is next.